These are not affirmations of the disordered lifestyle like we're being told, like the people on Catholic Twitter are saying. It is not an affirmation. And to read it as an affirmation is honestly doing violence to the text. It is the worst kind of scandal mongering. What's up, guys? David Gordon here with another episode of Contra Mundum. There was big news out of the Vatican today. We have seen the release of Fiducia Supplicans, a document by the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith, the DDF, which is now headed by Víctor Fernández, Cardinal Víctor Fernández. And the document, in a carefully circumscribed way, essentially greenlights the blessing of same-sex unions and irregular unions to a certain end. And it's very limited, it's very narrow, and the document is very precise, and it develops actually a theology of blessing. And it's not a document that's to be feared. It's well written, it's theologically orthodox, but that is not the headline that is sweeping the world. The press is having a field day with this, saying essentially that the church has changed its stance with regard to homosexuality. It has changed its tenor with regard to the screaming sins, and that the church is now kind of smiling on gay unions. And of course, Catholic Twitter, Catholic social media, Catholic YouTube is absolutely apoplectic. If you look at people, they've been guided by the usual suspects, the traditional villains, the Catholic grifting podcasting class, which has come out with low information reactionary takes to decry what the church has done today. You know, the dissent is rampant, and they're telling people that this is essentially a heterodox document. It's sowing the seeds for a later repudiation of the true doctrine on marriage. It's undermining marriage. It's the church retreating on her stance on homosexuality in the face of the onslaught of the world. People like Taylor Marshall have rushed the microphones, and they are now sowing discord in the church. And a lot of people, people are very unhappy about this. People are worried. It's having a real world effect. You have people talking out there openly about apostatizing, and that, Pope Francis can't be the real Pope. He can't be doing this. He's obviously in error. And you have a lot of people embracing the sin of dissent against the Pope, and it's all needless. It's all for, I think the benefit of a few who want to have sensationalist takes so that they can swell their audience and ultimately swell their coffers, get more Patreon funding, because they have set themselves up as an alternate magisterium, as the lay magisterium. That pays well. It doesn't pay well for the sober guys in the room to be like, look, I'm a son of the church. I'm always going to give it to you straight. But the church, the magisterium, they have grace of state. They have certain promises given to them by Christ, certain charisms given to them by Christ, that they are not going to lead you into the darkness of error. And, I'm a son of the church, so I'm going to help you understand what they have taught in a hermeneutic of continuity with their forebears. That's not a profitable take. It's not profitable to be like, don't look at me, I'm not a living prophet. I am going to do the disciplined academic work of showing you how this new document can be interpreted in light of what came before and in continuity with Catholic tradition. Again, not profitable. But if you set yourself up as the alternate magisterium and as a living prophet, you always get the feeble-minded, gullible people who are ready to sign over their lives to you. It's just Jonestown Part 2, If you say something charismatically enough, and if you're like mid-intellect where you really don't understand the flaws in your own way of thinking because of like the Dunning-Kruger effect, you don't understand how little you actually understand because you are not deft enough in your academic art, in media, to know the limitations of your own knowledge. You can be very confident in saying something given that background. You can be very confident in your low information takes that you're giving if you have that background. And a lot of people are like that. You have semi-charismatic figures out there that are able to swell an audience by confidently saying stupid catch terms like, weaponized ambiguity. And what's the other one they like to throw around? Controlled opposition. Everything is weaponized ambiguity or controlled opposition. Except for like Pius X. Everything beyond Pius X, weaponized ambiguity or controlled opposition. And you really need to listen to these arbiters of truth riding in on their white knights or white steeds and guarding the sacred deposit of faith, because the magisterium in later years has been corrupted and modernist, and it has become something of a front for Freemasonry, and it's been overrun. That's the take. That's the take. You've got to listen to the Taylor Marshalls of the world, because they're the ones that are going to save you from the villains and knaves in the church. So that's very profitable. So these guys go out there, they get the most sensationalist takes. They look at things through a lens of the hermeneutic of suspicion, a hermeneutic of rupture, and they say, what can I nitpick in this document? What can I pull out to say is menacing or evil or is a threat to the true Catholic faith? I'm going to talk about that, and I'm going to say that the Pope did this on purpose to be a subversive, to undermine the deposit of faith. That's the take. And that's what they've done with this document, which is, like I've said, largely commendable. And I want to go through it with you guys and just show you that it's nothing to be afraid of, and that the church ultimately is saying to people, yes, the church needs to be pastoral. It can't have any formal rites to bless your sin. And there can be nothing like a liturgical rite or quasi-liturgical rite blessing your sin. But what the church can do is, if you approach it spontaneously, then if it's in your pastor's prudential judgment that he thinks it wise, he can essentially pray with you that you can live a holy and upright life in accord with truth, and that this holy and upright life takes hold in your objectively disordered relationship. And that is what the church has said in this document. But that's not the take you're going to get from everybody from a Catholic podcasting class that's realized that it can lie to people and sensationalize truth, and that is a very prosperous field. That is a very lucrative endeavor. So you're not getting the truth. And this is why, to go on a bit of a tangent, Bishop Barron has said, there needs to be some control for what gets put out under the title of Catholic on social media, because it's really not a sustainable position to have a bunch of people that are self-serving and self-interested, or at the very least just ignorant, putting out something with a confident tone and in a tenor of dissent that is undercutting the true magisterium of the church. Because as you see, if you've checked your Twitter account today, the Catholic world is abuzz, and it's awash with claims that the magisterium is subversive and in error, and it's doing real damage to a lot of people's faith. So there has to be something done about this. I just don't know how every document can go through this process where you're having people say, see, the Pope is an agent of Satan. Maybe he's not really the Pope. And then the few people who try and have a sober take on what the Pope has said, they're called Pope-splainers. And they're called like shills for the Pope. And whatever, fine. Call me a Pope-splainer. Call Michael Lofton a Pope-splainer. You know what else a Pope-splainer is called? It's called a Catholic. It's called a Catholic. It's like saying I'm a fish eater. Yeah, I am. Yeah, I eat fish on Friday. That's a good thing. I am a Catholic. I am a son of the church. And yeah, I do owe obedience to the Holy Roman Pontiff, because people who are not united to the Holy Roman Pontiff, as the church teaches, cannot be saved. That's the doctrine. So yeah, I'm about to Pope-splain. And by Pope-splain, I mean give you the real Orthodox interpretation of this document. So let's look at it, and let's go through it with the important paragraphs in mind. So here's what the intro says. The value of this document, however, is that it offers a specific and innovative contribution to the pastoral meaning of blessings, permitting a broadening and enrichment of the classical understanding of blessings, which is closely linked to a liturgical perspective. Such theological reflection based on the pastoral vision of Pope Francis implies a real development from what has been said about blessings in the magisterium and the official texts of the Church. It is precisely in this context that one can understand the possibility of blessing couples in irregular situations and same-sex couples without officially validating their status or changing in any way the Church's perennial teaching on marriage. So what this document is going to do, by its own words, it's going to develop the theology of blessings. And particularly what it's going to do is say that, yes, there are these liturgical blessings, these official normative blessings that the Church has put out in the Roman ritual. And then it's going to make a distinction and say, but then there are these other unofficial blessings that priests, that pastors, in their prudence, in their discretion, can give. So it's developing this unofficial sort of pastoral style blessing as opposed to the liturgical and quasi-liturgical blessing that the Church has spoken of before. So it's going to be developing the Church's doctrine on blessing, the Church's praxis on blessings, but at the same time, it's explicitly hewing to the Church's perennial teaching on marriage, and it's expressly not validating the status of people in sinful unions. Period. End of story. That's at the beginning of the document. So, bearing that in mind, let's go on to the next important passage. Paragraph 3. The above-mentioned responsum elicited numerous and varied reactions. Some welcomed the clarity of the document and its consistency with the Church's perennial teaching. Others did not share the negative response it gave to the question or did not consider the formulation of its answer and the reasons provided in the attached explanatory note to be sufficiently clear. To meet the latter reaction with fraternal charity, it seems opportune to take up the theme again and offer a vision that draws together the doctrinal aspects with the pastoral ones in a coherent manner because, quote, all religious teaching ultimately has to be reflected in the teacher's way of life, which awakens the assent of the heart by its nearness, love, and witness. So, what this is referring to is the responsum of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith in February 2021 about whether people in same-sex unions could be blessed. There was a dubium that was submitted asking whether people in same-sex unions could be blessed, and the CDF came out with a resounding no. They cannot. It said this, consequently, in order to conform with the nature of sacramentals, when a blessing is invoked on particular human relationships, in addition to the right intention of those who participate, it is necessary that what is blessed be objectively and positively ordered to receive and express grace according to the designs of God, inscribed in creation and fully revealed by Christ the Lord. Therefore, only those realities which are in themselves ordered to serve those ends are congruent with the essence of the blessing imparted by the Church. In other words, the Church can't bless sin. The Church can only bless what's good. So it goes on and says, for this reason, it's not licit to impart a blessing on relationships or partnerships, even stable, that involve sexual activity outside of marriage, i.e., unions of people of the same sex. So that's what they said in the CDF said in 2021, and people didn't like that. The liberals inside the Church didn't like that. They didn't think maybe it was pastoral enough. They just thought it was a stern rebuke, which it was. It was the Church doubling down on its traditional doctrine and saying, no, you can't bless liturgically or quasi-liturgically same-sex unions. But then the Church wanted to go farther and be like, but we do want to extend whatever mercy and charity we can to these people. Because just like Pope Francis recently said, how it's a sin to essentially masculinize the Church. And people were apoplectic about that, accusing him of feminism and heresy. And everybody knows where I stand on feminism, not a friend. But he was absolutely right when he said that, and he wasn't being a feminist. The Church is mother. She is under the headship of Christ, who is Logos, who, the doctrine, the truth, all is something that comes from Christ. He is the head, just like the mother is under the authority and the reason of the father in the family. Well, the church, who is mother, is under the doctrinal authority of Christ. But at the same time, just like the mother intercedes for her children, perhaps when the father is implementing disciplinary measures and kind of curtails his analytical wisdom with her big heart. This is the teaching of John Paul II, that the mother is the heart of the family. The family who does not have a warm mother is really a coronary. It's a heartless, cold place. The church has to be mother and must extend mercy wherever she can. While Christ is, doctrinal, he's the source and font of the doctrine which must govern the mercy. The church, who is mother, must be willing and zealous to deal out mercy and to give mercy where it's sought or when it's needed. Just like your mother imploring for you when you were getting in trouble and maybe being disciplined by your father. So that's what Pope Francis means. In the church, that's why we call the church a she. We call it her. It's the bride of Christ. Yes, to masculinize the church is absolutely a crime. The church must be feminine, must be receptive, must be warm, must be the heart of the body of Christ, and must be just ready to give mercy wherever. So people were like, hey, what can the church do to reach out to people who are suffering with the cross of same-sex attraction and who've fallen into the sins that go along with that cross? How can we reach out to them in mercy? And then the church is saying, well, here's how you can legitimately reach out in mercy, and you can give some kind of pastoral aid to these people who are in these relationships, although we must respect the fact that you cannot bless sin. Especially, you cannot bless sin in liturgical or quasi-liturgical settings, because beyond the fact that you can't just bless sin, then it becomes a giant source of scandal. So the church, within that framework, within those parameters, was looking, okay, what can we do to extend the mercy of God to people, to give them encouragement, to greet them in charity and warmth, and to show that while we reject the sin, we also love the sinner. That was what was going on in the mind of the Orthodox wing of the church, who still wanted to be pastoral. Now, of course, we know what the game is for the left. I'm not an idiot, you guys. I'm a son of the church, and I'm always going to interpret the reigning pontiff in accord with tradition. But let's not be idiots. We know what a lot of the people on the left wanted. They wanted to regularize homosexual activity. They wanted to get rid of the stigma that surrounds homosexual activity, and they were going to do it under the guise of being pastoral and merciful. And, but what they really think is that the Bible is wrong, that sodomy is not a sin, and that ultimately the church needs to succumb to the gospel of the world and give up its perennial teaching. So don't think I don't know that that's like the plot of people on the left. But you guys have to know that Pope Francis isn't one of them. The Holy Roman Pontiff is guided by the Holy Spirit in his disciplinary decisions as well. Not only is he protected from doctrinal error, the Holy Spirit also guides him in his disciplinary decisions, you guys, and that's the teaching of the church. And you can find that in a couple of places. So when Pope Francis is doing this, he's not an agent of the left, as everyone just supposes. Everyone just takes these things for granted because the well has been so poisoned by malignant actors in the church who are pretending to be prophets and who are really just sowing dissent and taking everything in the worst light because, it's good to have an interesting take, right? It's good to get clicks on your YouTube. Or maybe they actually believe it. American politics has become so polarized and so not nuanced that people just analyze everything in the church, everything in church politics, everything in terms of doctrinal questions, in terms of the American left and the American right. So therefore, if the Pope is trying to do something pastoral and it happens to be, in a way that is accommodating to people that are living a disordered lifestyle like homosexuality, people automatically assume he's a leftist. Or if he does something like advocates for, let's say closing the border or something like that, well, then he's automatically a conservative Pope. If he upholds sexual morality, traditional sexual mores, then he's a conservative Pope. Because people just picture think. They have this false dichotomy that when the Pope does something that coincides with the American right, then he's a conservative. He's like a Republican Pope. When he does something that coincides with the American left, then he's the liberal Pope. Well, it's not how it works, you guys. We judge American politics by how closely it conforms to the doctrine of the church. We don't judge the doctrine of the church by whether it conforms closely to American politics. But a lot of these simpletons that rush the microphone to give their bombastic, absurd takes on, papal documents, DDF documents, developments in the church, they see everything and they color everything in terms of this false dichotomy of American politics, and it's just not like that. Like, you can be a perfectly orthodox Pope, and in keeping with what John the 23rd said at the inception of the Second Vatican Council, which was that we now have to extend to the world the medicine of mercy. We've essentially developed our doctrine. The world knows what the church stands for. Now it's time to give the medicine of mercy. Sometimes when a Pope does that, he's going to appear like he is, placating one group that we know is an objectively disordered group that has, nefarious actors in it. In this case, it's, I guess you could say he's, quote, cuddling up to the LGBT lobby if you're going to be unfair about it. But no, he's just being in continuity with John the 23rd's call for the medicine of mercy to go out to the world. And he's acknowledging that the greatest sinners are the ones most in need of an outpouring of love, mercy, and grace. So it's not something that we should just say, oh, he's reaching out to gays. He must really love gays. He must think that there's nothing wrong with homosexuality. No, that's poppycock. That's not what he thinks. We know from the past. Pope Francis has expressly called several times homosexuality sin. He knows it's a sin. He's not being a leftist, you guys. He's being pastoral, and he's saying, okay, I understand that this kind of scourge of homosexuality is now sweeping across the globe. And more people are finding themselves with this disordered attraction that is yielding seriously disordered relationships. So how do we deal with that? What do we do? Does the church just say, well, if you look at this moral theology handbook, if you look at what Aquinas says, if you look at what Scripture says, it's wrong, and therefore you need to stop? No, that doesn't work. I mean, sure, some people are going to be converted. You're just like, hey, this is the doctrine, and they're like eventually going to be able to conform their wills to their intellect. But that's not the most efficacious means of just obtaining a conversion. And I'm not saying you don't preach the truth, because you absolutely do. And you say it as hard as you need to. But in addition to preaching the hard truth, you also have to extend the hand of mercy, because ultimately, conversion and evangelization is relational. And this is also, if you watch previous podcasts, where Pope Francis draws the distinction between doing evangelization and proselytizing. One is relational, and one is cold and sterile. So in addition to saying, yeah, homosexuality is disordered, it's one of the screaming sins, it cries to heaven for vengeance, that's of course true. You also have to say, I see you're in this sin, how can I minister to you? How can I be pastoral to you? And that's the challenge of the world, or of the church in the 21st century world, which is overrun with false doctrines and errors. And that's what Pope Francis is trying to do. You guys are so insecure. Y'all are so insecure that the church is going to pivot away from her doctrines. And in part, I get it. I really do partly get it, because every other institution in the world you see crumbling, When I was a kid, I used to really love Disneyland. Disney was a bastion of purity and wholesomeness. and like happiness and mirth. And I associated Disneyland with all these good things and with purity and childhood innocence. And now it's this disordered, disgusting cesspool swamp, a hive of scum and villainy, as they would say in the Star Wars universe about like Mos Eisley, since it's Disney. It's become that. It's become a fetid, disordered thing. And we're so used to institutions that are like good and pure and American and conservative, crumbling to the woke gospel and the woke narrative, that we're almost projecting that onto the church. And that's your guys' own insecurity. You have to understand that. You have to do a little bit of self-analysis, psychoanalysis. You're insecure. And to a certain extent, I feel that same impulse too. Because I'm so sick of Western institutions selling out to the woke mob, right? It's gross. It's disgusting. I hate it. But you can't let that affect your faith in the church. The church is sui generis. It's its own thing. It's not comparable to any other institution on earth because it was founded by Jesus Christ. It wasn't founded by Walt Disney, who like cryogenically froze himself and was like a nut in many ways. It wasn't founded by some businessman, some entrepreneur who wanted to make a dollar here or there. It was founded by the living God of the universe, and he's promised to protect it. So you don't have to be all scared every time there's what seems like an accommodation to the left that matches up with kind of Democrat American politics. That doesn't mean that the church is actually not living up to her own teachings. That means that some of the church's teachings might actually be being championed accidentally by some of the nefarious actors on the left. You know? Obviously, with like something like immigration, nations have a right to protect their borders in accord with the common good. At the same time, nations also have a duty to let in people, the poor and the tired and the huddled masses, to the extent that they can in accord with the common good so that they can help the needy of the world. So there are two sides to that. It's not just, build a giant border wall. The Republicans have it all right, never allow any more immigration to ever take place. That's not the right take. Sometimes even a blind squirrel finds a nut every once in a while. And sometimes some of the things that the left is advocating for in a disordered way are going to overlap with what the church is advocating for in a very ordered way. So you guys don't need to worry when that happens, that when the church is saying something, it's accommodating and giving in and capitulating to the world. That's not what it is. It's that the world accidentally was right on something to a certain extent, and the church basically is right, in what it's teaching, and it just overlaps there. So don't worry about it, and don't be insecure. If the church is saying something, it's founded by Jesus Christ and protected from speaking error. The church is not going to lead you into sin. You need to give your assent to the bishop, to the magisterium, because where the bishop is, there is Christ. And that's the teaching of the patristics, and that's the teaching of the church. If you want to see Christ, look to your bishop. So don't worry, guys, is what I'm saying. Oh, that was a long tangent, but it's worth it because I see a lot of insecurity, and then because people get insecure, they run to these false prophets who tell them what they want to hear and entertain them with all kinds of sensational, stupid, bunk theories and spread chaos in the church. And it's not sexy or glamorous for guys like me to come around and be like, don't worry, it's going to be okay. The church is not selling out Jesus Christ, her Lord, her bridegroom. That's not what's happening here. I assure you, Pope Francis isn't the wrong one. Taylor Marshall is. It's the podcasting pimps who are wrong. It's not the church, you guys. Do your best to have faith in the church and say, yes, I have faith that what the church is saying aligns, even if I don't see it right now, aligns with what the church has always taught. The magisterium of Pope Francis aligns and can be squared with the teaching of his forebears. It can be assimilated into the magisterium of his forebears. It's an authentic development of doctrine. That's the attitude of faith, of childlike faith that you have to have in the church. Like a child trusts his mother, you're to trust the church. Okay, so going on. So the CDF in 2021 foreclosed on the idea that you could give liturgical blessings or normative blessings or official blessings to people in same-sex unions, in irregular marriages. But can the church, in some other way, some less official way, some spontaneous way, bless these people and ask for some good for them, for some guidance for them, for some mercy for them, that they might grow closer to God? That's essentially the question that people were asking in the wake of the 2021 document. And that's where we go to paragraph 4. And the church says this. The church says, Pope Francis's recent response to the second of the 5 questions posed by 2 cardinals offers an opportunity to explore this issue further, especially in its pastoral implications. It is a matter of avoiding that something that is not marriage is being recognized as marriage. Therefore, rites and prayers that could create confusion between what constitutes marriage, which is the exclusive, stable, and indissoluble union between a man and a woman, naturally open to the generation of children, and what contradicts it, are inadmissible. So anything that is going to essentially ape marriage or look like marriage or confuse people as to, is this kind of the equivalent of marriage, but for people who are SSA or in the LGBT crowd, is this what that is, and cause scandal among the faithful? The church is saying no. What looks like marriage, what apes marriage, that's not going to be an admissible blessing. And if you see what they're saying, they hearken back to this papal response to the dubia of 5 cardinals in October 2023 that says pastoral prudence must adequately discern whether there are forms of blessing requested by a person that do not convey a mistaken concept of marriage. For when a blessing is requested, it is expressing a plea to God for help, a supplication to live better, a trust in a Father who can help us live better. So people who approach the church for a blessing, the Pope left open in October of 2023, can people who are in these same-sex unions come to the church and say, look, can you bless me to live better? Can you plea to the Father in heaven for me to live a better life, more in accord with virtue? And the church is saying here in the document, in the DDF document, that sure, in accord with what Pope Francis said in the October 2023 response to the dubia, that yeah, the church, as long as it's not a rite or a blessing that looks like marriage, can certainly, in an informal way, pray for people, these couples in same-sex unions, to live a life that is more pleasing to the Father. Sure, they can do that, but it has to in no wise appear like a marriage or create scandal among the faithful. Paragraph 5 says, this is also the understanding of marriage that is offered by the gospel. For this reason, when it comes to blessings, the church has the right and the duty to avoid any rite that might contradict this conviction or lead to confusion. Such is also the meaning of the responsum of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, which states that the church does not have the power to impart blessings on unions of persons of the same sex. So a lot of the narrative has been that the church is essentially overturning that 2021 CDF document that says you can't bless sin. But it's a lot more complex than that. It's actually threading the needle and is saying that that document is still in effect. Yes, you cannot bless sin in this official way, because liturgically you have to bless only what is purely good. So in a liturgical setting, you can never have a rite of blessing something that is in and of itself disordered the way a same-sex union is disordered. So it's saying that that's still good law, but we're going to look ahead and see that even though no official liturgical blessing can be offered, is there something we can do on the margins and in an unofficial way, in a pastoral way, bless people by calling down the mercy of God upon them and asking for God's help in living a good life. So that's what this document is queuing up. It's not that the church has thrown out the 2021 CDF document as we're told by Catholic Inc., by Grifter Inc. It is expressly not that. Expressly, we are keeping the 2021 CDF document in place, leaving it untouched, unblemished. It's still good law. Okay. So let's go to paragraph 7. The Holy Father's above-mentioned response invites us to broaden and enrich the meaning of blessings. So again, that response is that pastoral prudence must adequately discern whether there are forms of blessing that can be given that are requested by one or more persons who are in an objectively disordered circumstance. That is like the challenge for the church in this day, because again, the church is loving and merciful mother who wants to extend that mercy to the very limits of where it touches on doctrine. The church must be as merciful as she possibly can be without transgressing doctrine. That is the Francis call. That is the Francis doctrine. I believe that is the one thing that defines this pontificate, actually. It is the method to his madness. So the Holy Father's above-mentioned response invites us to broaden and enrich the meaning of blessings. So this document now is going to broaden the meaning of blessings to allow for kind of an informal pastoral ministry that is not bounded everywhere by canon law, where priests aren't tripping all over themselves, worrying if they're transgressing canon law when they're simply trying to be pastoral and call people to dispense the medicine of mercy to people in the church. Paragraph 9 says, from a strictly liturgical point of view, a blessing requires that what is blessed be conformed to God's will as expressed in the teachings of the church. So again, we have this dichotomy between blessings as the church has understood them up till now, which is, liturgical, formal. You can only bless in this liturgical or quasi-liturgical way that which is purely good and conformed to God's will, the way you would kind of bless people before they're getting married. When people are essentially betrothed to one another, you can bless that because marriage is a very good thing. It's something that is of God. But there can't be these liturgical rubrics and these liturgical blessings for things that are not of God, that are not pure. So from a liturgical point of view, a blessing requires what is blessed be conformed to God's will. But, okay, how can we now develop blessings so that we can use blessings as a way to administer the mercy of God? And obviously it can't be in a liturgical setting. So now the Pope, the Church, the DDF is going to say, in accord with Pope Francis and what he's taught in his dubia responses, we need to find a way to, if we can, extend blessings to people who are in disordered situations, but bless them so that they can come back to order their lives to live in the truth. Paragraph 10. Indeed, blessings are celebrated by virtue of faith and are ordered toward the praise of God and the spiritual benefit of his people, as the Book of Blessings explains, so that this intent might become more apparent by an ancient tradition. The formulas of blessing are primarily aimed at giving glory to God for his gifts, asking for his favors, and restraining the power of evil in the world. There is also a care to do so with things, places, or circumstances that do not contradict the law or spirit of the gospel. This is a liturgical understanding of blessings insofar as they are rites officially proposed by the church. So, by the way, hidden in here is the nice little gem that, homosexual unions are things that contradict the law and spirit of the gospel. That is the implication, obviously, of that sentence. But again, that is the liturgical understanding of blessing. So let's pivot to the extra liturgical stuff here in a minute. Paragraph 11, basing itself on these considerations, the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith's explanatory note to its 2021 responsum recalls that when a blessing is invoked on certain human relationships by a special liturgical rite, it is necessary that what is blessed corresponds with God's designs, written in creation and fully revealed by Christ the Lord. For this reason, since the church has always considered only those sexual relations that are lived out within marriage to be morally illicit, the church does not have the power to confer its liturgical blessing when that would somehow offer a form of moral legitimacy to a union that presumes to be a marriage or to an extramarital sexual practice. Okay? Yeah, absolutely. The Holy Father reiterated the substance of this declaration in his response to the dubia of two cardinals. Going to paragraph 17, we get a little bit of an explanation of an exegesis on scriptural blessings, and essentially there are three sorts of scriptural blessings. The divine gift that descends down from God, the human thanksgiving that ascends up to God, and the blessing imparted by man that extends towards others. So the DDF is just saying that, roughly speaking, there are three kinds of blessings. There's up to down, down to up, and then there's just lateral blessings where you're blessing the goodness and kind of extolling the merits of others. Okay, so it's a basic characterization of the types of blessings. Paragraph 19. In his mystery of love through Christ, God communicates to his church the power to bless. Granted by God to human beings and bestowed by them on their neighbors, the blessing is transformed into inclusion, solidarity, and peacemaking. It is a positive message of comfort, care, and encouragement. So the DDF is saying that this is kind of the purpose of the blessing: comfort, care, and encouragement. Not affirmation, mind you. Note what the church is not saying here. It's not saying that when we give any kind of blessing that we are affirming you in some disordered lifestyle. These non-liturgical blessings, this is what it's kind of queuing up to say. These non-liturgical blessings are going to be blessings of comfort, care, and encouragement through the trials of life. They are not going to be where we're patting you on the back and saying, this is great, we affirm what you're doing, the way the church blesses something like your nuptials, or when you become engaged or betrothed. It's not the same thing. The blessing expresses God's merciful embrace in the church's motherhood, which invites the faithful to have the same feelings as God towards their brothers and sisters. Okay, merciful embrace. Again, not affirming a sin, but a blessing is a type of merciful embrace where the church is extending the clemency of God to neighbors. That doesn't sound so objectionable. Paragraph 21. In order to help us understand the value of a more pastoral approach to blessings, Pope Francis urges us to contemplate with an attitude of faith and fatherly mercy the fact that when one asks for a blessing, one is expressing a petition for God's assistance, a plea to live better, and confidence in a Father who can help us live better. We've said that already because that is what Pope Francis said a couple months ago in 2023 in his dubia responses. So when one asks for a blessing, one is simply asking for God's assistance or a plea to live better. So people who are asking for a blessing in the church, they're asking for God's help in living better. What is objectionable about that? What's wrong with that? If somebody is a sinner, they can't go to their priest and ask, hey, I need God's assistance in living better. If people are in an objectively disordered union, they can't go to God or to the priest and say, can you implore God for his graces so that we can live better? You guys see what you're doing here? Paragraph 21. In order to help us understand the value of a more pastoral approach to blessings, Pope Francis urges us to contemplate with an attitude of faith and fatherly mercy the fact that when one asks for a blessing, one is expressing a petition for God's assistance, a plea to live better, and confidence in a Father who can help us live better. This request should, in every way, be valued, accompanied, and received with gratitude. People who come spontaneously to ask for a blessing show by this request their sincere openness to transcendence, the confidence of their hearts that they do not trust in their strength alone, their need for God, and their desire to break out of the narrow confines of this world enclosed in its limitations. So, when somebody asks for a blessing, they're asking for God's assistance to live better. And that should be commended. That's not something that should be looked at askance. That's this secondary kind of blessing that we're talking about, this pastoral blessing, this non-liturgical, non-normative type of blessing. That's what we're talking about here. And this should not be balked at. This should not be met with derision and scorn. In fact, this should be embraced. Sure, people sin. Sure, people have disordered lives, but we're not going to impose a morality test on anyone who comes to a priest to ask that he bless them so that they might live a better life. That's the kind of blessing we're talking about here. Paragraph 24, from the point of view of pastoral care, blessings should be evaluated as acts of devotion that are external to the celebration of the Holy Eucharist and of the other sacraments. Indeed, the language, rhythm, course, and theological emphasis of popular piety differ from those of corresponding liturgical action. For this reason, pious practices must conserve their proper style, simplicity, and language, and attempts to impose forms of liturgical celebration on them are always to be avoided. So in other words, the Pope is saying, do not attempt to make this non-liturgical and informal type of pastoral blessing into a sort of pseudo-liturgical act. Don't attempt to do that, because real pastoral work is often undermined by over-regularizing something, making something too formal. Also, this is subject to the same criticisms above. If you do start over-formalizing blessings to people in homosexual unions, then it's going to start to look like the ape of marriage, like it's some alternate lifestyle that the church may be smiling upon or not minding. And that has to be avoided to avoid scandal. So, yeah, there can be this non-official blessing, this pastoral blessing of people to live better, but it's in no way to take on the form of something that is regularized by the church, that is part of a liturgical act or anything like that. It is to remain organic and spontaneous and pastoral. The church, paragraph 25, the church, moreover, must shy away from resting its pastoral praxis on the fixed nature of certain doctrinal or disciplinary schemes, especially when they lead to a narcissistic and authoritarian elitism, whereby instead of evangelizing, one analyzes and classifies others, and instead of opening the door to grace, one exhausts his or her energies in expecting and verifying. Thus, when people ask for a blessing, an exhaustive moral analysis should not be placed as a precondition for conferring it, for those seeking a blessing should not be required to have prior moral perfection. So he's just pointing out what's obvious. When you approach the church to ask for some kind of a blessing, the church does not impose some rigorous moral test on you, as if you're approaching them for a sacrament and you need to be properly disposed to receive the sacramental graces that will be produced inside you. That's not what is proper for a blessing. A blessing is you are imploring God's help in possibly amending a very disordered life. If you're going to foreclose on a blessing for sinners, then you almost are foreclosing on the option for repentance in the first place. To ask for the grace of conversion, that's the first step in actually converting. So if you knock off somebody's ability to ask for that grace of conversion, or especially to ask somebody else who is a holy man, who is an upright man, who's a righteous man, who's a minister in the church, who is ordained to ask for that conversion on somebody else's behalf, because the person who is being implored for is not perfect, you're actually denying the sinner the chance to come back into the church, into regularizing his life, to living in accord with the moral theology of the church. So Pope Francis is saying, why would you do this? No, you don't have to impose some moral test on everyone who comes to you to ask for a blessing. That's not how blessings work. And he's absolutely right. That is not how blessings work. You don't need to be living in a state of grace to get a blessing. You don't. There's no rule that says that. As a matter of fact, blessings are probably most needed when you're not living in a state of grace, when you need to come back to Holy Mother Church to reorient your life to the true and the good and the beautiful. That's when blessings are most needed. So Pope Francis is pointing out something obvious. The fact that people are in objective sin, that's no obstacle to them getting a blessing. Fair enough. Paragraph 27, in the catechesis cited at the beginning of this declaration, Pope Francis proposed a description of this kind of blessing that is offered to all without requiring anything. It is worth reading these words with an open heart, for they help us grasp the pastoral meaning of blessings offered without preconditions. It is God who blesses. In the first pages of the Bible, there is a continual repetition of blessings. God blesses, but humans also give blessings, and soon it turns out that the blessing possesses a special power which accompanies those who receive it throughout their lives and disposes man's heart to be changed by God. Okay, so we have this wording. Blessings are ordered towards changing man's heart to make it conform to God, disposing man's heart to be changed by God. That doesn't sound objectionable. That doesn't sound like an affirmation of a homosexual union to me in any way. That doesn't sound threatening. It doesn't sound menacing. So we are more important to God than all the sins we can commit because he is Father. God will never stop blessing us. It is a powerful experience to read these biblical texts of blessing in a prison or in a rehabilitation group, to make those people feel that they are still blessed, notwithstanding their serious mistakes, that their heavenly Father continues to will their good and to hope that they will ultimately open themselves to the good. That is what the DDF is saying these pastoral blessings are ordered towards doing. Again, not affirmation. Even if their closest relatives have abandoned them because they now judge them to be irredeemable, God always sees them as his children. So these blessings, we're queuing this up, right? Cardinal Fernández is queuing this up. And ultimately, again, Pope Francis has promulgated this document. He's queuing this up that you can go for a blessing when you are in a disordered state for one of these pastoral blessings and ask God to help bring you out of this sin, to help you live a better life. And that is a kind of blessing that can be given to somebody in a gay union, in an irregular marriage. And that fully comports with the deposit of faith. That fully comports with Catholic doctrine. The popular understanding of blessings, however, also values the importance of descending blessings. While it is not appropriate for a diocese, a bishop's conference, or any other kind of ecclesial structure to constantly and officially establish procedures or rituals for all kinds of matters, pastoral prudence and wisdom, avoiding all serious forms of scandal and confusion among the faithful, may suggest that the ordained minister join in the prayer of those persons who, although in a union that cannot be compared in any way to a marriage, desire to entrust themselves to the Lord and his mercy, to invoke his help, and to be guided to a greater understanding of his plan of love and of truth. So, the popular understanding of blessings, however, also values the importance of descending blessings. While it is not appropriate for a diocese, a bishop's conference, or any other kind of ecclesial structure to constantly and officially establish procedures or rituals for all kinds of matters, pastoral prudence and wisdom, avoiding all serious forms of scandal and confusion among the faithful, may suggest that the ordained minister join in the prayer of those persons who, although in a union that cannot be compared in any way to a marriage, desire to entrust themselves to the Lord and his mercy, to invoke his help, and to be guided to a greater understanding of his plan of love and of truth. So, this is really one of the most important things that we're going to see come out of this document. It's saying what the permissible purpose of blessings of homosexual unions is. Let me underscore that. Although the union cannot be compared in any way to a marriage, people can be blessed who desire to entrust themselves to the Lord and his mercy, to invoke his help, and to be guided to a greater understanding of his plan of love and of truth. So people in disordered relationships are living a lie. And insofar as they want to approach their pastor, and the pastor wants to say, I am going to ask that God bring you on the path to love and truth. He's going to extend his mercy to you, to remove this disordered lifestyle from being a stumbling block from you. You can entrust yourselves to him, that he's going to help you with your cross. Then those things can be blessed. You can say to this, disordered couple that we're entrusting you to the mercy of the Lord, and he is going to guide you to truth, ultimately as a way out of the disordered lifestyle. That's what Pope Francis is saying here. We've already seen that he's saying that this is a disordered lifestyle that cannot be in any way be seen as analogous to marriage. He's already said, essentially, the subtext is that this is a sinful life and that you need God's mercy and that he can give you his mercy and help you out of it. And now we're just seeing that that is exactly the kind of blessing that the church is greenlighting. That is precisely what the church is saying can happen. These are not affirmations of the disordered lifestyle like we're being told, like the people on Catholic Twitter are saying. It is not an affirmation. And to read it as an affirmation is honestly doing violence to the text. It is the worst kind of scandal mongering to say that this document is, patting people on the back and saying, no problem here, you can go ahead. And the church is just really whistling past the graveyard and subtly changing her doctrine, subtly trying to equate homosexual unions with marriage. That is such a bad take. It's such a disingenuous take. There's no way you can read this document and come away thinking that. Paragraph 31. Within the horizon outlined here appears the possibility of blessings for couples in irregular situations and for couples of the same sex, the form of which should not be fixed ritually by ecclesial authorities to avoid producing confusion with the blessing proper to the sacrament of marriage. Again, how many times has the document said this cannot in any way be made into this normative, official, liturgical process that is going to be seen as the ape of the sacrament of marriage? That cannot happen. It would be scandalous. It would be scandalous to people, to parishioners. It would be scandalous to the same-sex attracted people who are actually involved. It can't happen. So it's not supposed to be some official ritual. We're talking about more of a spontaneous prayer with your pastor, asking for the guidance of God for these people who are locked in a disordered lifestyle. In such cases, a blessing may be imparted that not only has an ascending value, meaning you're blessing God and thanking him for his mercy and his guidance, but also involves the invocation of a blessing that descends from God upon those who, recognizing themselves to be destitute and in need of his help, do not claim a legitimation of their own status, but who beg that all that is true, good, and humanly valid in their lives and in their relationships be enriched, healed, and elevated by the presence of the Holy Spirit. So again, you're not claiming a legitimation of your status if you're seeking this kind of pastoral blessing. It's expressly there in the document. The kind of pastoral blessing that Cardinal Fernández, the DDF, Pope Francis have in mind for people in irregular unions and same-sex unions It's not a blessing that will legitimize their own objectively disordered relationship. That's not what it is. It is simply asking that what is true and good and valid in their lives and their relationships be enriched or healed or elevated by the presence of the Holy Spirit. Healed. That the disorder be healed. That a relationship that does not conform to the will of God, say somebody in an irregular marriage, maybe that it can be regularized in the church somehow. Maybe that the disordered relationship that is essentially fornication, or worse, sodomy, can be broken off. In the case of, an irregular union, maybe it can be legitimized by the church somehow later on when proper form is supplied and whatever is getting in the way of that proper form, those obstacles be removed. These forms of blessing express a supplication that God may grant those aids that come from the impulses of His Spirit, what classical theology calls actual grace, so that human relationships may mature and grow in fidelity to the gospel, that they may be freed from the imperfections and frailties, and that they may express themselves in the ever-increasing dimension of the divine love. So you're asking God in these blessings for the removal of imperfections and frailties. Read here, sin, disorder, and that these people may express themselves in the ever-increasing dimension of divine love, which, of course, would be in accord with natural law and truth and right reason. So all of those legitimately, objectively disordered components of any of these relationships be purged. That's what you're asking for in these blessings, in these pastoral blessings. Paragraph 33, this is a blessing that, although not included in any liturgical rite, unites intercessory prayer with the invocation of God's help by those who humbly turn to Him. So you're asking people for God's help. You're asking people, sinners, living imperfect lives, for the help of God. The church can't do that in her prudence, in her discretion. Your pastor can't walk alongside you in your difficulties in life. That's what people are upset about. That's what the conniption fit in Catholic social media is about. Ultimately, a blessing offers people a means to increase their trust in God. The request for a blessing thus expresses and nurtures openness to the transcendence, mercy, and closeness to God in 1,000 concrete circumstances of life. So how many times have we seen this document say this? The request for a blessing is asking for mercy and closeness to God and transcendence, turning away from the passing things of this world to the things that are eternal, the things of God's kingdom, the things of divine providence. This is clearly imploring God for help to live a righteous life. It is not asking God to celebrate your sin, to celebrate these disordered unions. It's in no wise can be called that. To say it is such is such a disingenuous take. Is such a bad take. It's misleading. I don't think anyone can read what is on the face of this document and come away with, the church is just stepping away from her perennial teaching. Because the document, for one, as you know, expressly says that the church is not stepping away from her perennial teaching. The church is extending the medicine of mercy to the very boundaries of where it touches up against the justice of God. So we're not going to treat the sinner like, the lepers were treated in the Old Testament, where the discarded and left at the margins of society. You're saying to the lepers, come in and let us try to heal you. Let us give you medicine so that we can heal you and bring you into the bosom of the church. That's the difference between the church, this New Testament theology, and this Old Testament theology. This sort of Pharisaical Old Testament theology. This is going to the margins and extending people the hand of mercy and saying, come into the church. We're not going to affirm your leprosy. We're not going to affirm your SSA, your spiritual leprosy, your sexual sin. But we are going to say everything about you. We're going to pray for you. We're going to pray that you can accept and embrace the mercy of God. We're going to pray that through the grace of God, you can conform your life to the will of Christ so that one day he can say to you, well done, good and faithful servant. That is what we need for our time. For a day when sin abounds so much, this is how God's promise that grace will abound all the more comes about. It's through the church going out and extending her hand to people to bring them back to her bosom. Okay, paragraph 36. In this sense, it is essential to grasp the Holy Father's concern that these non-ritualized blessings never cease being simple gestures that provide an effective means of increasing trust in God on the part of the people who ask for them, careful that they should not become a liturgical or semi-liturgical act similar to a sacrament. Such a ritualization would constitute a serious impoverishment because it would subject a gesture of great value in popular piety to excessive control, depriving ministers of freedom and spontaneity and their pastoral accompaniment of people's lives. So again, the church is careful to maintain this distinction, this classical distinction of blessings that it's held, that blessings cannot be given in this formal way towards things that are not pure and good. It would be a source of scandal. It would be the ape of the marriage covenant if people could go to the church and get this classical liturgical-like blessing on their same-sex union. That would be wrong. It would be scandalous. It would create great problems for the faithful. But so again, the church is distinguishing this new kind of pastoral, spontaneous, informal blessing from the classical blessing that we've had in theology, and is thereby developing the theology of blessing, saying that, yes, you can, in a liturgical sense, call down God's favor and grace upon something that is good and embrace it and affirm it and endorse it. That's the classical understanding of a blessing. But secondly, you can also ask for God's accompaniment and mercy of people who might not be living an upright life at that time. So we're careful to make that distinction. This is a distinction that's being drawn repeatedly in this document because the church is careful to say it cannot bless sin. It can accompany the sinner, but it cannot bless sin. And it's saying it over and over again. Paragraph 37, in this regard, there come to mind the following words of the Holy Father, already quoted in part. Decisions that may be part of pastoral prudence in certain circumstances should not necessarily become a norm. That is to say, it is not appropriate for a diocese, a bishop's conference, or any other ecclesial structure to constantly and officially establish procedures or rituals for all kinds of matters. Canon law should not and cannot cover everything, nor should the episcopal conferences claim to do so with their various documents and protocols, since the life of the Church flows through many channels besides the normative ones. Thus, Pope Francis recalled that what is part of a practical discernment in particular circumstances cannot be elevated to the level of a rule because this would lead to an intolerable casuistry. So what Pope Francis is really doing here is he's saying that these bishops' conferences who have essentially created liturgical rites within their national boundaries that have created these formalized rites for blessing and affirming gay unions and irregular unions, those people are in error. He's smacking them down. He's bringing down the hammer on them. He's saying that what they are doing cannot be done and is an abuse, and it has to be stopped. It has to be curtailed. He's saying that real pastoral practice, the authentic pastoral practice that's calling down the medicine of mercy from God to these people who are living these disordered lives, that is calling for these people to reorient their lives and respond to God's grace. He's saying that those authentic blessings, those authentic pastoral blessings, have nothing to do with those inauthentic affirmations, official liturgical and quasi-liturgical affirmations that errant bishops' conferences have been given. That's what he's doing here. This is not simply, I am going to extend an olive branch. This is also, hey, bishops' conferences. Hey, European bishops, German bishops. You guys are in error. You better watch it. What you're doing is not authentically pastoral. What you're doing is sowing error. What you're doing is creating a rule of affirmation when you need to be towing the line of church doctrine and looking to the particular circumstances of somebody, of perhaps a couple who's in a disordered union, and telling them, we can extend to you God's mercy in this case, but we are not going to extend God's mercy to these unions qua these disordered unions. We're not going to say these unions as these disordered unions may be blessed, because that would be wrong. So he is actually coming down quite hard and quite explicitly against these errant bishops' conferences, particularly conferences like the German bishops. So that shouldn't be neglected. That's very important. For this reason, one should neither provide for nor promote a ritual for the blessings of couples in an irregular situation. At the same time, one should not prevent or prohibit the church's closeness to people in every situation in which they might seek God's help through a simple blessing. So while you can't have a ritual for blessing people, couples in an irregular situation, as is happening with the heterodox bishops of Europe, many of these national bishops' conferences who, again, are trying to regularize and normalize homosexuality and make it just an alternate lifestyle. They're trying to get around the scriptural bans and the traditional bans on this as being a sin that cries out for God's vengeance. They're trying to normalize it. He's saying that you can't do that. And he's drawing a line between that and authentic mercy that is oriented towards bringing sinners in conformity with the law of God based on pastoral prudence and discretion, based on a priest saying, in this instance, I think I can help this individual couple by blessing them so that they might order their lives towards truth and towards right living. So that's a great distinction. It's a big distinction. These things cannot just be wholesale blessed. They can't be liturgically blessed. They can't be officially blessed. They can't be wholesale blessed. But people have to have pastoral prudence. And when a priest sees people whose particular circumstances might require that they are open, that might suggest that they are open to altering their lives and they want the guidance of God in their lives, then the priest can, in particular circumstances, go and give a certain type of blessing that is not an affirmation. Big difference. Big difference. Paragraph 39. In any case, precisely to avoid any form of confusion or scandal, when the prayer of blessing is requested by a couple in an irregular situation, even though it is expressed outside the rites prescribed by the liturgical books, this blessing should never be imparted in concurrence with the ceremonies of a civil union and not even in connection with them, nor can it be performed with any clothing, gestures, or words that are proper to a wedding. The same applies when the blessing is requested by a same-sex couple. Okay. So blessings for irregular unions and same-sex couples cannot ever in any way ape or look like the ceremonies of a civil union or take place in connection with them. Think like a temporal connection, a closeness in time, a proximity in time, a proximity in distance. These kinds of blessings are not to look like the church is smiling on these unions. They're not to be performed with clothing or gestures or words that are proper to a wedding, which would thereby suggest that these unions are being normalized or affirmed, or that this is somehow the civil union or same-sex union equivalent of a true marriage. That there's some kind of a false equivalency there. That can never happen. Why is the DDF, Fernández, Pope Francis, why are they so keen on pointing this out? They're so keen on making this distinction because they're saying that these disordered unions are gravely sinful and that that's not the kind of blessing that can be given. You can't give the classical church blessing to these things because they are disordered objectively. And a classical church blessing can only be given to something that is good and true, that comes from God. Again, the 2021 document is still in effect. The church cannot bless sin. The church cannot bless what is disordered. So this is the development of the doctrine of blessings, that you can bless something. You can call down God's grace on people so that they can amend their lives, even when they're in this disordered circumstance. And you can bless these people who are in this disordered circumstance in order that they amend their lives and call out for the mercy of God. You can do that. But the Pope, the DDF, Cardinal Fernández, are absolutely clear that this in no way can resemble a formalized blessing, a liturgical blessing, or something that would go along with a wedding, with Catholic matrimony. It's not that kind of thing. It's not a ritual. It's not something where people can post up the photos and be like, oh, this is our, gay Catholic wedding. No, no, no. The Pope, the DDF, Cardinal Fernández, purposely nixed that idea because those things are disordered and the church is not affirming that sin. Quite the opposite. The church here is saying, oh, your lives are disordered. Your relationships are disordered. And therefore, we're going to call down God's mercy on you so that you can live a proper life and reorient your life towards God and start living as his adopted sons and daughters in a state of grace. It's quite clear that that's what the church is saying here. Paragraph 40, such a blessing may instead find its place in other contexts, such as a visit to a shrine. So we're talking about the informal, pastoral, spontaneous blessing of people who are in objectively disordered situation, that they turn away from their sin. This blessing may find its place in other contexts: a visit to a shrine, a meeting with a priest, a prayer recited in a group, or during a pilgrimage. Indeed, through these blessings that are given not through the ritual forms proper to the liturgy, but as an expression of the church's maternal heart, similar to those that emanate from the core of popular piety, there is no intention to legitimize anything, but rather to open one's life to God, to ask for his help to live better, and also to invoke the Holy Spirit so that the values of the gospel may be lived with greater faithfulness. It's worth repeating that. There is no intention to legitimize anything, but it's to open one's life to God, to ask for his help to live better, and to invoke the Holy Spirit so that the values of the gospel may be lived with greater faithfulness. Wow, that sounds like the church is doing what the church needs to do. The bark of Peter is ordered towards carrying us above the flood waters of sin and getting people to the promised land, helping people to attain eternal salvation. That's what the church is supposed to be doing. Reaching out to the sinners, the people at the margins, and extending them the mercy of God. Accompaniment does not mean affirmation. Everybody out there is losing their heads over this, that the church would dare have a priest, go to somebody who's in his flock, in his parish, and say, yeah, I'll pray that God gives you graces so that you can reform this relationship. That's all that this is. That's all that this document is. It's saying, contra all the bad national bishops' conferences that you cannot be blessing these things in the formal liturgical way that you have been, that's wrong, and that the only room for blessing these disordered unions is in this informal pastoral way, where on a case-by-case basis, on a spontaneous basis, a priest or a pastor might pray with people and call down God's blessing so they can reform their life. Shame on all the people who have taken this opportunity to say that the church has changed its doctrine. Oh, it's weaponized ambiguity. What's ambiguous about this? This document's not ambiguous. It's perfectly clear. In fact, it's trying to be inescapably clear. It's trying to lay out a set of rules that protects blessings from being given to things that are evil. It's shielding those sacrileges from happening. And at the same time, it's allowing for the church to dispense mercy where it's prudent to do so. And it's laying out a bunch of tests and rules. Oh, you can't do it in a liturgical setting. Oh, you can't do it so that it looks like it's in a wedding. You can't do it where it concurs with the ceremonies of a civil union. It can't be happening in connection with clothing, gestures, or words that are proper to a wedding. Well, that's really specific stuff. Weaponized ambiguity. What does that even mean? This is one of the least ambiguous documents I've ever seen. It's trying to be inescapably clear. I don't understand the take. We insist on snatching defeat from the jaws of victory. It's absurd. We're told that this is controlled opposition. That the Pope is putting out this document, it's saying a bunch of things, paying lip service to what's good and orthodox in the church, but really it's a Trojan horse to get in blessings of same-sex unions. That's preposterous. It's explicitly saying you cannot bless these unions. What else can it say? What do you want the church to do? What do people want the church to say? Oh, you can never call down God's graces for people to repent? Like, that's the level of Phariseeism we are at in the church now. People are so insecure that the true faith is being undermined by whatever developments are coming in the church, in the magisterium, whatever pastoral praxis that the church is putting out. People are so insecure that things are going to change and that the deposit of faith will be forever tarnished, that they're actually closing the door to God's mercy. They're actually saying that priests should not be able to call down mercy upon people who are living disordered lives. That's what they're saying. Now, I understand some of this is caused by a media that is ripping things out of context, by a media that insists on saying that Pope Francis is in fact changing the church's teaching on this, by a media that's really gloating about it because it's so used to the Lavender Mafia winning victory after victory that they just assume, because the media, most of these people are faithless, most of these people are not good Catholics, they just assume that the church is the next domino to fall. So they're taking their victory lap, but that's not what this is, you guys. If you think that's what this is, you've got another think coming. That's not what this is. That's the church is extending mercy insofar as it's possible to people. And there's not going to be much after this. This is about it for the development of pastoral practice on this issue. There's not much more that we can do. We have said, to homosexuals, to people in irregular unions, you are still, if you're baptized, a child of God. You are wanted. Holy Mother Church loves you. Holy Mother Church will accompany you. Holy Mother Church will pray for you. We will give you the sacraments where we can, whenever we can, as long as you're not in mortal sin. If you're in a state of grace, and if you are in a proper state to receive the sacraments, we will go through a process of discernment with you to see if you're in that proper state. And if you can get the sacraments, then you should get them. And we'll help you come back to an objectively upright life. We'll pray that God gives you these graces to come back to living in accord with Catholic truth. But it's not going to go any farther than that. The church has pushed mercy to its boundaries now. There's not many other places to go. If you don't hear that the church is calling you to repentance out of love and that it wants what's best for you, and it is truly seeking, not in a rigorous, judgmental way, for you to come back, but it's seeking you to come back because it loves you and it wants to see you saved, then you're deaf. Because in the post-conciliar years, that message has become clearer and clearer and clearer. And that's been a threat to people, especially in this pontificate, that we're transcending like the rigorism and the manualism that really marked post-scholastic Catholicism. People are very threatened by that. Like if you're saying, like, okay, these truths that Thomas Aquinas wrote, these truths that the moralists wrote in their manuals, those are good, but they're insufficient. People get very threatened by that. Like, yes, Catholic moral theology, we do adhere to these rules. We do adhere to this set of values. But this set of rules does not define Catholic moral theology. A relationship with Christ, a love for God is ultimately what defines Catholic moral theology. It's ultimately what defines what it means to be a Christian. And sure, you have to, if you love Christ, you follow his law. Absolutely. That's what Jesus says. So manuals are very helpful in telling you this is what your intellect must assent to. This is what your intellect must know. This is what you must believe, and this is how you should strive to live your life. This is, these are kind of the boundaries in which you must live your life. But that's not the end-all, be-all of what it is to be a Catholic. And the church is saying that ever more clearly now. And there was a risk in centuries past that we reduced what Christianity is to a mere following of a set of rules. And that was a dangerous way of thinking, because Christianity, and we know this from Pope John Paul II, he talks about this in Veritatis Splendor, what it means to be moral is really to be in relationship with Christ, to give up the things of this world and go and follow Christ. It far transcends just hewing to a code of ethics, a code of rules. And as the church has articulated this more, particularly under Pope Francis, people think that the church might be saying, they fear that the church might be saying that following rules isn't important. And that's not what the church is saying. The church is saying following rules is necessary but not sufficient for being a Christian. It's necessary, but it's not sufficient. And this is why Thomas Aquinas at the end of his life, and I think this gets lost on people, is like, all that I've written is like straw. Because he has this like proto-beatific vision where he sees Christ and he starts levitating, and then he's given some degree of divine revelation. And he sees that, Christ says, you've written well of me, right? But then Aquinas is contemplating his own writings and is like, this is like straw. All these rules, all this philosophy and theology, all these truths and propositions that I've laid out, they're nothing when I come to this kind of unmediated understanding of what God is. This beatific vision understanding of who and what God is. Everything else pales in comparison to that. So all these rules that have been written out, sure. Are they true? Are these propositions correct and accurate and sound? Sure. But they pale in comparison to what God truly is when we understand him and we see him without the mediation of words and logic, but when we really possess him in the beatific vision. And that's what the church has moved to. It's not that the manualists were bad or that the scholastics were wrong. No. I mean, Thomistic theology is the theology of the church. But it's not the end-all, be-all of Christianity. It's a way of understanding perhaps best, a system of understanding perhaps best the truths of God. Sure. But ultimately, Christianity is about being in relation with Christ. And the church is about being the sacrament of mercy and salvation for all who are in the body of Christ, which is why the faithful have a right to the sacraments. And those who are properly disposed have a right to these graces, essentially, these sacramental graces. And the church is understanding more and more that Christianity is not just about rigorous adherence to rules, although rules are necessary, because rules ultimately stem from truths, from theological truths. But the church is coming more and more to understand that there's, a greater Christian worldview that must be given to people that transcends rules. The love of Christ must be given to people and shown to people. And we are in danger of saying there's so many rules and strictures that we are limiting in an undue way the love of Christ. Now, of course, rules are necessary also because they come from Christ. But when they become a stumbling block to shining forth the love of Christ and dispersing the mercy of Christ, then we have to reconsider them insofar as it's possible without violating reason. And that's what Pope Francis is doing. That's why the Francis doctrine is to extend the mercy of God to the extent possible without transgressing doctrine. That's what it is. And this document is fully in accord with that. So do not listen to the prophets of doom who are saying that somehow, this spells the end for the church's classical teaching on marriage. This spells the end for the church's classical teachings against sin, particularly the sin of homosexuality. No, not at all. Not at all. This is just the church saying that even in wicked, disordered lifestyles, the church, insofar as it's not going to cause scandal, insofar as we're not doing some liturgical action that amounts to the blessing of sin, the church is going to walk with you, and it's going to intercede with you, with God the Father on your behalf, to ask for mercy to be extended to your life so that you can be fully incorporated into the bosom of the church. That's what this is doing. This is not an affirmation of sin in any way. And there are people out there that are like, well, this is going to lead to all kinds of abuse. You know what else leads to abuse? Distribution of the Eucharist. Every Mass, everybody in my parish goes and gets the Eucharist. And the confession lines aren't that long. And I know, based on the statistics, right? People are committing mortal sins. A lot of Catholics out there are doing like flaming mortal sins. Birth control, everybody knows, is in regular use. A lot of Catholics don't believe in the real presence. A lot of people are fornicating and whatnot. It's not 100% of people who are in a state of grace every week, but basically 100% of my parish goes and receives the Eucharist every week. So, having no entrance examination that guards the Eucharist, that also, I guess, is an abuse, right? The fact that we administer the Eucharist to anyone who presents himself for the sacrament, is that an abuse? Should we curtail that? Should we have an entrance exam? Should we screen people before administering the Eucharist? See, that's the stupidity of this. Yes, I'm positive this will be abused. It seems like James Martin was gloating about it already. He's going to be doing all these blessings for his gay friends, and they're probably not in accord with this document, with this DDF document, right? But that abusus non tollit usum. That abuse does not negate proper use, guys. Hey, there's a Latin saying for it, so it must be true. But it actually is true in this case. Abuse of something does not destroy or in any way negate or call into question its proper use. Everything can be abused. Every single thing can be abused. You can get high on kitchen cleaner if you want. But that doesn't mean no one should have kitchen cleaner. It means kitchen cleaner should be used properly. Kitchen chemicals should be used the right way and not for getting high. You can sniff glue and misuse it. That doesn't mean that there's no proper use for glue or that glue is somehow suspect or dubious. Just, no, use it properly. The fact that human frailty means that there will be sinful misuse of this permission that's being given by the Vatican, by the DDF, by Pope Francis, doesn't mean that there's not legitimate cases where a priest in his pastoral prudence can see a couple and be approached by a couple who is asking for the blessing of God in their life, even within the confines of this disordered union. And the priest can say, sure, I'll do that in this case because I know that I'm going to call down the mercy of God on you, and hopefully this reorients your life to him. Just because we have James Martin, who is going to possibly, it looks like, misuse these permissions, doesn't mean the case that I just described is no good, that it's not of value, that it's not going to happen. So don't buy that lie. Sure, there are going to be problems with any permission the church gives. We didn't even have permission for there to be, bishops' conferences giving liturgical blessings to same-sex unions, and that was happening. I mean, the non-permission was being abused, right? So this can only make things better because the Vatican is specifically calling out that form of abuse, that liturgical abuse where same-sex unions are being celebrated in churches with national bishops' conferences setting these rubrics for the celebration of these disordered lifestyles. That abuse was already happening before this. If anything, this document is going to help curtail those abuses, and now it has laid out a very particular set of circumstances under which these pastoral blessings, these informal and spontaneous pastoral blessings may be given. So if anything, this is going to rein in the abuses that were already taking place. It's a good thing. This should be celebrated. Pope Francis believes that irregular marriages, that homosexual unions are sinful. And he's saying that they're not going to be affirmed and they're going to be cracked down on. And the only type of blessing that we're going to give to those unions is going to be a blessing that the priest in his pastoral prudence says, in this case, I think because of your unique circumstances, we can pray that God is going to give you his mercy because you are open to it. You have demonstrated a willingness to amend your life or be open to God's graces. So I'm going to pray for you because you've requested it, that God showers you with his mercy and allows you to live better, to invoke the Holy Spirit so that the values of the gospel may be lived with greater faithfulness. Well, that's a pretty good thing. That's a commendable thing. So don't listen to the prophets of doom. It's a fine document. You idiots, Catholic pundits out there, the Catholic rad trads that are spreading these malignant lies. You idiots, it's not weaponized ambiguity. You're just too stupid to digest the content. You're just too dumb and dense to digest the document. And you filter everything through your unfaithful, suspicious lens. That's the problem. It's not with the document, you guys. It's with you. And it's with your audience that you've done Pavlov's dog-like conditioning to be sitting there and waiting for you to throw them a scrap of red meat in the form of dissent from the living magisterium. As if you are the white knight riding in on his noble steed to vanquish the dark forces that are threatening tradition, even though those, quote, dark forces are the ministers and masters of the church herself.